Listeners, explorers, and fae folk of all kinds, welcome back to the Magic Story Podcast. This is your guide to the planes, characters, and stories of Magic's multiverse. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Natalie.
And I'm your other co-host, Harless. Listeners, you asked for it, you've waited, and you were very, very patient. And now the time has finally come for our return to Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. It took us nearly 2 decades, but we are going back with Lorwyn Eclipsed.
Magic fans first fell in love with the provincial plane of Lorwyn back in 2007, and then we discovered the dark side of the plane a year later with Shadowmoor. Now, I wasn't playing Magic back then, but I have recently just fallen in love with this plane. It sits on this very thin line between creepy and cute, which I'm just going to dub creepy cute. And if you're new to the setting like I was, this is probably a pretty jarring setting to look at. And that's why we want to give you the scoop on everything you need to know about this setting ahead of our long-awaited return.
Now, I'm in a very similar position where I didn't get to experience these sets as they released, but I have gotten to learn about this world since and have really come to just adore it. And now we're making a full return to the plane in a modern Magic set. Now, I was backstage at MagicCon when we showed off some of the cards from the set, and y'all were so loud, so I know you're excited for this too.
Oh yeah, I was right there kind of sneakily in the audience, and I heard everything, and it was loud. The hype is real out there. So to help you prepare for our return to Lorwyn, we'll be taking you on a quick trip through the plane, its stories, and what might lie ahead in Lorwyn Eclipsed when it releases in January. But if you're itching to get your hands on more Lorwyn content right now, you won't have to wait. Lorwyn First Light is out now, available only on D&D Beyond. You can check it out using our link in the description.
So you can play as a new species, you can cast spells beneath the Great Aurora, and discover the wonder and whimsy of the plane. You can start exploring Lorwyn with Dungeons & Dragons right now with Lorwyn First Light.
I think Dungeons & Dragons is a wonderful medium for exploring the planes of magic. Looking at the artwork from this plane, it asks you to imagine yourself within this setting, and role-playing games are the perfect way to answer those questions with your friends.
Lorwyn First Light is available on D&D Beyond right now, so check out our link in the description to dive right in. And as you're getting ready for your Lorwyn D&D game, we've got a session 0 for you. So today, we're going to prep you for those D&D games and our upcoming return to Lorwyn with a journey through Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. Join us as we head into the multiverse.
While our upcoming set is called Lorwyn Eclipsed, you'll hear folks refer to its setting by 2 names, Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. But Harless, what exactly are Lorwyn and Shadowmoor?
What great questions you have today, Natalie. Now, let's go back to when these sets were first released. So in the past, Magic sets were released in what was called blocks. Now, these are usually 3 sets that all took place on one plane, telling one kind of overarching story. But here, Wizards did something different. So our first visit to Lorwyn was the eponymous Lorwyn set, followed by Morningtide. And rather than 3 sets, this was a 2-set block. But at the end of Morningtide, the plane underwent a massive transformation, becoming a darker version of itself known as Shadowmoor. And that setting was explored in another 2-set block, which was called Shadowmoor and Eventide.
And that's part of why players have come to love Lorwyn. The setting's duality was baked into the very core of the release. The plane of Lorwyn is the embodiment of light, existing in a perpetual day without end. While the plane itself came before the term, I definitely call it a cottagecore world. Creatures from mythology like fairies, elves, and treefolk roam alongside elemental embodiments of emotion. It's this very surreal, dreamlike place.
But if Lorwyn is day, then there must be a night. And that's where Shadowmoor comes in. So as a result of a powerful magical event, the plane of Lorwyn would sometimes transform into its dark counterpart called Shadowmoor. Now here, everything cute about Lorwyn takes on a grim veneer. We see more monstrous creatures, and the formerly peaceful inhabitants take on a more violent demeanor. And this is really what helps delineate this plane from something like Eldraine or Bloomborough. While those planes lean more on the bright and hopeful visions of fairy tale media and their inspirations, Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, they strike more toward the dark side of those stories. So if you loved Bloomborough but you wanted more necromancers, this is the place for you.
It reminds me of those like classic bedtime stories, that sometimes have a macabre bend to them.
Yeah.
And you have like this surface level sweet nature of Lorwyn that gives way for Shadowmoor's more eerie aesthetic. A lot of the fun of the original 2 blocks was seeing how characters and places changed from Lorwyn to Shadowmoor.
Now that we get the gist of the plane, it's time to meet the faces of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. When you look at the cards in the original Lorwyn set, you're going to notice something interesting, and that is that there are no humans. Now, that's because this is one of the very few planes in the multiverse without humans at all. Instead, we see a wide variety of species, both familiar and unfamiliar. And one of my personal favorites, I think it's one of yours too, is the fairies.
So these fairies are tricksters that use magic and cunning to meddle with the affairs of the plane's inhabitants. This is taking me back to Rankle from March of the Machine side story from Eldraine. So definitely love that story. And this was reflected in a lot of those original fairy cards, which focused on countering spells, tapping down creatures, overall mucking up your opponent's plans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love my fairy deck. While most inhabitants of the plane underwent drastic transformations when Lorwyn became Shadowmoor, the fairies were largely unaffected. And when everyone else was having their memories rewritten, well, the fairies were more than happy to take advantage of that to play some tricks.
Of course.
The fairies were led by the Fae Queen Oona, who actually orchestrated the shift between Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. She was responsible for the Great Aurora, which is this massive magical wave that would wash over the plane every couple centuries, transforming it from Lorwyn into Shadowmoor and back again.
All the depictions of Oona and her fairies have this very dreamlike quality. And one of my favorite versions of her was from a philanthropic Secret Lair drop from a few years back. And Mila Pesic folds the flowers of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor into Oona's appearance. And it makes it look like she's emerging from the plane itself. It's just so incredibly stunning.
That is a stunning card. And as beautiful as Oona is, she's also trying to control the plane. Surprise, surprise. The Great Aurora and the extended cycle of night and day gives her dominion over the denizens of the plane. She held control over Lorwyn and its people for ages, but that changed with the arrival of a certain multiverse-shaping event. With that, it is time to meet our next group of inhabitants, the wise Treefolk.
On Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, even the plants themselves come to life as treefolk roam the plane as wizened protectors. These trees, through the strange magic of the plane, become sentient and often live for ages. This makes them excellent keepers of knowledge, but also prime targets for those who'd seek to control the plane. The most prominent treefolk in our first visit to this plane was Kolfinor. While he was referenced back in the original set story, he wouldn't get his own card until 2020's Commander Legends. And I actually opened this card when the set first released back in 2020, and I even got the foil etched version. It was awesome, and I tried so hard to make a deck around him, I kind of ran out of tree cards. But speaking of which, let's take a look at that artwork.
I love the look of these guys, the Treefolk of Lorwyn, Kolfinor especially. They have really striking designs where their facial features are actually etched into the bark of their trees. And it's a really just clever way of depicting that wise old man character, but as a tree.
So, as I said, we first met Kolfinor in the original Lorwyn, where he took on this mentor role in the story. Now, this set was released following a major shift in the Magic multiverse, which hastened the coming of the next Great Aurora. This sent characters like Oona and Kolfinor into a scramble to prepare for this change. Now, Kolfenor was the last of his lineage of Treefolk. If the world were to suddenly transform into its macabre counterpart, that might cut his branch of the proverbial family tree short. Now, Kolfenor sought help from some of the denizens of Lorwyn to oust Oona and regain control of the plane.
This is what drives a lot of the conflict in the original Lorwyn story. We have adventurers from across the plane being called on a quest, but as the block progresses, we learn there's a deeper, darker truth to the whole story. In a way, it mirrors a lot of, like we said before, those classic fairy tales that the block draws from. You look at it and you see a lot of cute, a lot of charming, but the story has a darker truth beneath the surface once you dig in further.
So while Kolfenor would go on to meet a fiery end, his plans would still take root. His people lived on through the aptly named sapling of Kolfenor. And as Lorwyn became Shadowmoor, the sapling saw how the people of the plane changed into their grim counterparts.
I want to put the spotlight on one of my favorite creature types, the elementals. So these creatures are the embodiments of raw forces of nature and emotion. There are humanoid elementals, which are a lot like the Genasi from Dungeons and Dragons. So imagine, spellcasters who exist in harmony with their magic, with burning hair and fire magic at their fingertips.
Burning hair? Are you sure that just doesn't remind you of another pyromancer you happen to love?
Listen, I will admit that I have my biases, but the really fascinating elementals are the ones that embody abstract concepts like dread or vigor or guile. These more emotional elementals are a mystery even to the denizens of the plane. Their designs are especially interesting with these twisting forms that look both real and unreal at the same time, almost as if they're out of a dream.
And one of the most iconic legendary elementals has to be Aisling, the Pilgrim. She's one of the flamekin of Lorwyn, and we follow her over the course of Lorwyn and Morningtide. And as we moved into Shadowmoor and Eventide, she demonstrated how the shift to Shadowmoor affected the plane's inhabitants.
The version of Aisling from Lorwyn was a humble sorcerer, searching for purpose on her peaceful plane. And for this, she was given the epithet of Aisling the Pilgrim for her many journeys across the plane. But on Shadowmoor, where emotions are inverted, she became a force of raw destruction. Her once bright red flames were swapped with a vibrant purple. Her potential for growth became destruction. And she was given the name Aisling the Extinguisher.
We got a couple creatures in these sets with Lorwyn and Shadowmoor versions, but Aisling's was the one that really spoke to us. The core conceit of her character remains the same, where she's a spellcaster with an affinity for destructive magic, but the way that it's applied changes. It's that reinterpretation of the same idea on Lorwyn and Shadowmoor that makes this setting so interesting.
Yeah, I really love, if you look at the cards side by side, just the emotional difference that the artist was able to capture.
Yeah.
Is really stunning.
Yeah. If you're like us and love the multifaceted flamekin Aisling, then you won't have to wait long to see her again. Aisling Rekindled was one of the first cards we previewed from Lorwyn Eclipsed. And if you look closely at the Commander deck's packaging, you'll see her burning brighter than ever.
Now that we've seen Lorwyn become Shadowmoor, it's time to go over how the original story ended. To do that, we'll have to meet one of the plane's most famous or infamous inhabitants, and that is the Elves of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor.
As cruel as they are powerful, the Elves of Lorwyn deviate from their typical appearance from across the multiverse. While elves are normally depicted as wardens of the natural world, here they're a lot more hostile in their approach.
These elves are fixated on beauty, and they believe that elves are the most beautiful creatures in existence. And in their eyes, everything that deviates from elvish beauty standards is beneath them. So they actually divide elvish society into castes based on beauty, which they use to assert control over the other inhabitants of the plane, and cast out any elves that they deem unworthy.
Who would have thought that impossible standards of purity would eventually be turned inward? We see this happen to the elven warrior Rhys, who first appeared in the original Lorwyn set, and after a battle that left his elven horns mangled, Rhys was deemed an eye blight, the elves' term for creatures they deem ugly.
Having lost his place among his people for a very silly reason, Rhys formed a ragtag group of Lorwyn outcasts. It was this group that was responsible for planting the sapling that would become Colfanor's offspring. And when the plane became Shadowmoor, Rhys and the other elves transformed into their darker counterparts. The elves of Shadowmoor, in contrast to their isolationist counterparts, are cultivators and protectors of beauty. Despite Shadowmoor's cruelty, these elves are much more peaceful and accepting when compared to their Lorwyn counterparts.
Luckily, the creation of the sapling of Colfanor and the group of adventurers gathered by Rhys led to Oona being overthrown. It feels fitting that on this plane that captures the strange and atypical elements of magic, that the outsiders of the plane are the ones who banded together to save it.
While Lorwyn isn't a story about warring faiths or massive dragons like some other magic sets, it does touch on something very human, which is ironic considering there are no humans in this set, which is what it means to find community in a strange world. Reading through the original fiction, even though you're hearing a story from the eyes of this ages-old treefolk or living embodiments of fire, they're still motivated by very personal desires. When you look at the artwork, the pieces that are most striking to me are the ones that show the different characters from different walks of life joining together. It shows how the lifeblood of the plane is rooted in the connections that its people share.
And I think that's why so many people love this plane, right? It's cute, yes. It's beautiful, undeniably. But most of all, it's earnest and unabashedly itself. It's truly and uniquely its own thing, Lorwyn.
So where does this leave Lorwyn? What familiar faces can we expect when we return? And how soon can we get our hands on these cards? Because, oh my gosh, they look stunning.
Yeah, and we'll get the answers to those questions very soon. For now, we can look forward to seeing all of the best elements of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor together in one set. With the end of the Great Aurora, the two sides of the plane are closer than ever before. The future is bright and dark, if you're on Shadowmoor, for this cottagecore plane.
I'm excited to see what stories get told on Lorwyn, and in fact, I'm looking forward to seeing what Lorwyn stories we can also tell in Dungeons & Dragons.
We were lucky enough to get a sneak peek at Lorwyn First Light from our friends over on Dungeons & Dragons, and Harless and I have already been building new characters, writing new campaigns, and just generally getting ready to play in Lorwyn.
All of the weird and wild characters from this plane are perfect for a role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons. Whether you're recreating Oona as a fairy, multi-classed wizard warlock, or designing a boggart druid, there are so many stories to tell beneath the sun and moon of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. And while you're weaving your own tales of magic and mystery, you can get ready for Lorwyn Eclipsed, where we're returning to Lorwyn and Shadowmoor alongside some familiar faces. The set's fiction kicks off this December, with the set's debut coming in January. You can read along on mtgstory.com or listen along right here on the Magic Story Podcast.
Whether today was your first time experiencing Lorwyn or it was a walk down memory lane, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. We will see you soon for Lorwyn Eclipsed, but until then, have a magical day.